Is public education preparing young people for life or just for exams?
Welcome to Voice Notes Suck with Jay and Dave.
In this episode, we explore public education in a changing world. From outdated systems and underfunded classrooms to the complexities of uniforms, exams and inclusion. As society evolves, are our schools keeping pace?
So, it's episode 5 of series 3 of Voice Notes Suck. And this one is called The Right to be Taught. Or we're talking about public education. Jay, there's a lot in this subject that I can think to talk about, but I'm also acutely aware that I don't have any young people, and that my educational experience in the UK, because I haven't been educated anywhere else, was based on 90s schooling. And things have changed since the 90s. The digital age is here, the information age, whichever you'd rather call it. And the way that we assimilate and digest information is very different to how it was when I was growing up. I'm excited to talk about this, and I'm also acutely aware that there are very, very different standards globally and nationally, and that even filters down locally, where, in the UK, 2 schools in the same town can have very, very different standards of education. So I'm excited to dig into this topic, and I'm not quite sure how to start it beyond this message. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Jay, and see if there's any burning topics about public education that you want to start talking about.
Thanks, Dave. Well, as a parent and also working in primary schools for 15 years, I feel like I've had a good insight into education on both sides. I'm also a parent governor at our daughter's primary school. So our eldest is at high school. So we've got one at primary, one at high school. I've worked in schools. And for me, the biggest standout that I can see is the sheer amount of paperwork that is required for teachers to fill in and concentrate on and focus on. And it, in some regards, it feels like what's happened is there's been no gatekeeping or moderator or something for all that information flowing through into the schools. Like someone's not realised, the teachers are actually drowning in paperwork. Do you think that's possibly a problem?
It's definitely possibly a problem. It's definitely possibly. But yes, it's possibly a problem. I need to know more about what that paperwork was. If all of that paperwork was based on the safeguarding of our children whilst they were under government care, which they are for 30 to 35 hours a week, then all of that paperwork's vitally important. If that paperwork is irrelevant to the curriculum and irrelevant to the children that are being taught, then it's definitely a problem. I just don't know what all of that paperwork is, and I don't have that experience. I'm not a teacher. I haven't worked in a teaching role, so I couldn't tell you what that paperwork looks like. I do just want to clarify the schooling in the UK, though. So primary school or junior school in the UK is from the ages of 4 to 11, and then high school or secondary school would be from the ages of 11 to 16. Some of those schools will include a slightly older age range as well, and go up to the age of 18. And that education from 16 to 18 is known as college in the UK before you go to university at 18. So just for people listening, they understand the age ranges we're talking about when we're referring to different things within the schooling system.
I know we're jumping in early with this, Dave, but if you're listening and you're a teacher or if you're an educator, let us know in the comments how you feel about the education system, how you feel being a teacher or an educator within that system, and whether you feel that it's helping our children or whether you feel that it's hindering our children. From my perspective as a parent with a child at a high school that I don't particularly believe is functioning well at all, it's hindering. Those children are berated for the way they look, the way they dress, their attitude. All of those things seem to be like top of the agenda for criticism. And it worries me that a lot of the people there, a lot of the staff, particularly in the higher parts of the school, don't seem to consider a teenager's feelings. They don't seem to understand how volatile teenagers are and how sensitive they are. And that is a huge problem, in my opinion.
I'd love to hear from other parents and teachers on this topic, Jay, especially as a non-parent. I think it would be important to my understanding of what children and parents expect and want versus what teachers need to deliver. I think feelings for young people is a tough one, and for a couple of reasons. You know, they're going through vast change, both hormonally and physically. Adolescence does that to a person, you know, makes them change from a child into an adult. And with that comes some real challenges. I'm also acutely aware that the world doesn't care about how I feel, and the world isn't going to care about how they feel individually. And do we need to deliver that message during school because it's something they're going to come across as they come out of school if it's not already delivered? And I think the question from me for you is how much focus should be put on how someone feels versus what they potentially need in terms of education.
Yeah, but it's not even about how they feel, Dave. It's about respecting and honouring their expression as human beings. That's stifled a lot in high school, and it's a mistake. Well, it's stifled a lot in the high school that our eldest daughter goes to. I'm not so sure about other high schools. That I am interested to hear about. I'd be very interested to hear about the practice of high schools and whether it affects the children's results, whether it affects the young people's education, well-being, if they see less fighting, if they see more joy. I want to know about those things.
I guess that leads me to another question then in that case. So what could your daughter's school do differently to honour that expression that you're talking about? What actions should the school take, or could the school take, that would enable that expression from the young people at the school?
I think it's really important that they change the way they communicate with them. So instead of criticising them and telling them that they'll never amount to anything or they're never going to have a good education literally because they've got eyelashes, it needs to change. That needs to change. They need to have more equality as well, because they don't treat the boys and the girls the same. They just don't. And that needs to change too, because unfortunately that perpetuates this male dominance attitude. It just perpetuates it. They don't see that, but that's what happens.
So how don't they treat the boys and the girls the same, Jay? And is this something you think happens across all schools, or is this something that's very specific to your school? I understand your frustration, especially if teachers are speaking to children in that way. Like, no teacher should ever tell a child that the way they look is going to impact their education, unless the way they look is getting them sent home from school because they're not meeting the uniform standards that are set. And if there's a uniform standard in place and they're not meeting it, and then they're not at school, that will have an impact on them. But how are boys and girls treated differently at your school? Are boys breaching uniform standards and getting treated differently? And if they are, do you think that's happening across the country? Do you think that's a broader problem than just the school that you're referring to?
Yeah, boys are breaching uniform standards, but it's hidden. So they'll wear watches, or they'll have a necklace on that they hide. Whereas the girls want to wear a bit of makeup and eyelashes. Quite simple, really. They just get treated far worse than the boys, which I feel is not right. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's not right to treat young people like that. And it's done in such a way where it belittles the students. And to me, that's seriously wrong. It's not the right thing to be doing to people. And they get sent home, they get put into turning point. They're not going to show any respect to the teachers, are they, if they're not getting any respect back? It just perpetuates this endless cycle of disinterest in learning.
That doesn't sound so much like boys are treated differently, rather than boys are better at hiding their uniform breaches than girls are. And if the boys are in front of teachers less, do you think that might make a difference to how the teachers respond to them? So if less boys are breaching standards and less boys are being brought up in front of teachers, then do you think that has an impact on how those boys are approached compared to the girls? And I'm not saying it's right, I'm wondering if there are reasons that cause these differentials and the way that students are potentially treated differently based on their sex. The other thing that I want to ask off the back of this is, do you think there should be a uniform code? Do you think that there should be rules around makeup and watches and haircuts? Or do you think children should be able to wear and do what they want in terms of their appearance?
I am happy for there to be some kind of a uniform, because students are representing the school at the end of the day. I just don't feel that it should be so militant, and it is, and it bothers me that, because all the focus ends up going onto the way that the children look and the way that the children present themselves, and instead of into their education. And it shows.
I agree about uniforms, Jay. I think schools should have uniforms. I think there are big problems opened up if schools don't have uniform policies. It sounds like the teachers in that school in your daughter's school, have been encouraged to prioritise the wrong thing, whether that comes from the heads at that school, whether that comes from the local educational authority or board, or whether it comes from, governors or whomever at that school. It sounds like the teachers aren't equipped to deal with it very well. They're not given the tools, they're not given the support, and it ends up essentially being a battle of wills between the students and specific teachers. And I think the problem needs to be sorted out, in all likelihood, at either the head level or above.
Yeah, it's definitely the senior leadership team, as they call them now. It's definitely something that could be fixed and could be addressed and sorted. You just have to get through the attitudes of those people, ironically. Anyway, I don't want to go on too much about that. I don't want to dwell on that. What I want to talk about is standards in education. Do you think it's actually possible to have standards in education, or do you think they're inevitably going to shift depending on the location of the school and the demographic that are at the school?
I think as soon as you bring individual people into anything, then the barometer is widened, if you like. So those standards are broader. I think curriculums are de facto standards. That's the purpose of them. The whole point of having a curriculum is so that you have a certain standard of education and an expectation of what children are taught. I also feel that curriculums are designed to get children to pass exams, because that's how schools are rated and scored. So they're not necessarily about educating children, about teaching young people what they need to know, about teaching young people how to think or how to discern information, real information from fake information. They're about making sure people know what they need to know to pass an exam. And I think that's a problem.
Oh, absolutely. The focus is not on the children. The focus is not on the young people. The focus is on how the school looks to the outside world and how much money they can get.
Of course it is. If the system is set up so that they are rewarded based on the results of their students, then they're going to prioritise the results of their students above all else, because that's what gives them the funding they need to keep getting better results. It's like an ever expanding circle. There's some real challenges, and I think it's important that we recognise how lucky we are that we've got publicly funded education that every child has access to in the UK. I think it's massively important to recognise that. But that doesn't mean it can't be better. And what would you do regarding funding to make it fairer, or to make it so that schools weren't so focused on exam results above everything else?
I'd be inclined to look at other countries to see how successful their education system is in regards to the well-being of the children. And I'd also experiment with a student-led curriculum. I know that is a thing in some places. I know they've tried that and it's worked, maybe in smaller schools. We could have an issue in this country where high schools are too heavily populated. There were too many children. Like, look at these super schools. They merge schools together, so they've got even more children. There's a high school around here. It's got an absolutely ridiculous amount of kids. There's like thousands of them all in one place. And I know we're getting a bit focused on high school and primary school here, aren't we, in regards to education? The right to be taught. The right to be taught is fundamental to our growth as a society. And we need to ask the question, are we growing in a healthy way?
So I think the opportunities to learn from other countries are few and far between. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit. And I know that improvements can be made. And I'll come to one of the improvements I think the UK can make in a moment, in agreement with something you've just said. However, when we're rating or measuring ourselves against the rest of the globe, I think we're really only looking at Scandinavia and potentially Japan as people that perform better than us across a wide range of subjects and education, and providing education for free for all young people. So I think whilst improvements can be made, I think we need to recognise, what we've got as well. And I think class sizes are massive. I think so many classes in the UK are close to 40 kids in a class with one teacher. And none of those kids are getting enough time to maximise their education. None of them are getting enough support to maximise their education. All of them are competing for the time that teacher has in that class or during that day. And if we could reduce class sizes, I think we would see the standard of education dramatically increase.
But how do we decrease class sizes? Where do the children who aren't in those classes go? Where are they going?
I think we just need more teachers, Jay. And I know that's more complex than saying employ more teachers, but that's the answer, isn't it? With more teachers for the same amount of students, you'd have smaller classes.
Yeah, but does that not mean you then need bigger buildings?
We might need some more space as well, but I don't think so. Countries talking about a decrease in birth rate. If there's a decrease in birth rate, there's less children. If there's less children, there's more available classrooms. I mean, I know I'm simplifying something that's incredibly complex. I appreciate that, but no, I don't think we need more space. I think we just need to use the space we've got better.
I think it's too simple to suggest that. It's way more complex. One of my biggest questions, though, is there a disconnect between attainment and what we're actually seeing happening in society with people, particularly young people?
I can't think of a simpler solution, Jay, even if there's more complexities behind what I said than how I made it sound. Like, there's nothing easier than employing more teachers and using the space we've got better. There just isn't. I can't think of a simpler solution than that. And like I said, I know it's more complex than just employ more people, but that's the easy answer. With regards to a gap between attainment and output, 100%, and it goes up into university. There are more university graduates than there are graduate jobs. That's a problem. And I think we still teach people in a very analogue way, even though the world is very digital. There's a lot of textbooks, at least from my understanding and perspective. And even if work's being done in a digital manner, it's still being taught in an analogue way. And we need to fix that gap to make a real difference to the futures of the young people in education at the moment.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because we talk about free education. We've got free education at primary education. We've got free education when we go to secondary. And then you have to get a loan to go to university. So we've got like thousands and thousands of young people in serious amounts of debt. And it's almost like you can't go to university if you can't get that money, or only the privileged can go to university. And I don't think that's right. I feel like we're setting up kids for something that may be potentially unattainable in a lot of cases. I really want to see a shift and a change in that. University should be provided too if they're starting it off at primary, don't you think?
Okay, so let me flip the question. Why should everyone who doesn't go to university pay for a university education of all of the people that do via their taxes? I think that's even more unfair than what you've just suggested personally.
That's not what I suggested. That's what you're suggesting. I never suggested tax should pay for it. We should find some other way.
What other way would we pay for it? Because it's tax that pays for all education at the moment, Jay.
I don't know, Dave. I don't have the answer there. But if tax can't pay for it, then how about we tap up all these people who seem to have sickening amounts of cash? Maybe they could invest at the very least in providing bursaries or grants or something. I'm not saying that they should give the money, but they could at the very least provide it to help with education. It's a potential solution, although I don't know how much it will cost at all. Maybe our listeners will have some answers to that.
Potentially. I think I don't view university education as a right. I view it as a privilege. And I think, once you're an adult in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of the country, if you choose to go to further education, then that is a choice, and that choice comes with a cost. And I personally don't have a problem with that.
I feel it's imbalanced, and I feel that it's selling people a bit of a lie. Primary education's free, secondary's free, college is free. Bam! Now you have to pay if you want to go to university. Or just go and work in a factory. We're teaching children to pass exams. We're not giving them any particularly useful life experiences, and then we're shoving them into factories. It's almost like that's what education wants to do. It wants to educate the children so they can pass exams, so then they can just become part of a workforce.
That's interesting, because by enabling everyone to go to university, you're just pushing that problem 3 or 4 years down the line. Like, you're not getting rid of that issue. You're not getting rid of that issue at all. And yeah, I'm a big believer of that's what school is designed to do. It's designed to prepare you for a life of work. You listen to the bell. You rock up before 9 o'clock in the morning. You leave at set and predetermined times. I'm a big believer that education is set up to get people ready for the workforce. And I think there are some concerns with that, but I don't think you get rid of that by making university free. I think you just push that problem down the road a little bit.
I mean, I wasn't specifically talking about kids who may come from privileged families or just wealthy families. I'm talking about kids who don't come from families that are particularly stable. They may struggle emotionally. They might suffer abuse at home. What happens to those kids? Because the education for those children almost feels like they're treating symptoms rather than going to the root cause and dealing with that. I'm not putting down anyone who works in those kinds of education. I know it's a massive challenge, and I know it comes with a lot of difficulties. I'm not naive there. But those children are definitely left out of mainstream education quite often. Our youngest daughter's school don't. It's very well integrated. SEN kids are just integrated into everything. It's really inclusive. It works really well. Other schools, like my friend's school, son's school, completely and utterly it was left. It's like they didn't care about him. It's like he was a forgotten child.
I get it. I understand to a point. I also think that university isn't for everyone, and it's never been designed to be for everyone, and it shouldn't be thought of as for everyone. However, 40% of kids in the UK, or 38.2% of kids, go on to higher education, or they did in 2021. That tells me it's not just for the privileged or the wealthy, but it's for the mass majority, for anyone that wants it. Regarding SEN, I think there's some challenges around that, just even in school. Like, whose responsibility is it to spot the issues? Is it the parents? Is it the NHS's, the health services? Is it the educational system? If it's the educational system, is it the school's responsibility? Is it the teacher's responsibility? How do you get effective training? And if it's a teacher's responsibility, how do they spot it when they're teaching 40 kids? Like, there's some real challenges. And I think we do quite well as a country educationally. That doesn't mean we can't do better. And I think we should be talking about these things. We should be looking at them. And I also want to say that they've massively improved since the 90s and the 2000s when myself and my siblings were at school. When I was at school, there was a table for the thick kids, for the stupid kids. There wasn't any SEN recognition at all. So we've come on leaps and bounds. It doesn't mean we can't be better, but I think we need to recognise what we've gone from to, if that makes sense.
You say whose responsibility is it? It's everybody's responsibility. We're all responsible for the children. We're all responsible for their nurture. We're all responsible for their growth and education. We're the role models, even the people who are not in education, even the people who aren't parents of those children. We just have to be better, Dave. We just have to be better role models for those kids, in my opinion. I know it's a big ask, but that's also part of education. When people say education, they always focus on schools, but we're out in the wild as well. We've got to educate kids out in the wild too. We need that as well.
Jay, we've flown past 25 minutes and we probably need to think about wrapping this episode up. I will let you decide if you're going to leave another message or if we're just going to summarise after this one. I agree with everything you said in your last message, even if I haven't agreed with everything you said in this episode. And I think society needs to recognise its responsibility to educate the next generation and to make sure the next generation feel valued so they can add value to society. I think that's vitally important. I think we could have spent a lot longer just talking about university. We could have probably had 2 episodes on that, let alone everything else about education. And I'd love to talk about how it's everybody's responsibility to be a role model at some point in the future as well. Like I said at the beginning, I'll let you decide if you want to leave another message or if we're just going to go and find a summary for this episode.
This week, we talked about public education, its strengths, its blind spots, and where it needs to go. We looked at how the digital age has transformed the way we learn and whether the system is still fit for purpose. From paperwork overload to uniform policing and from overcrowded classrooms to SEN support, we asked, are we prioritising the right things? We also reflected on the value of university, the purpose of exams, and the role society plays in shaping young people's futures. Education is a right, but it's also a shared responsibility. Thanks for listening to episode 5 of series 3, The Right to be Taught. Please take a moment to follow or subscribe, like and share our podcast. It makes a huge difference. And feel free to continue the conversation in the comments. You can find all of our relevant links in the description. Dave's been Dave, I've been Jay, and we'll see you next time for another episode of Voice Notes Suck. You've been listening to Voice Notes Suck with Jay and Dave.